Bend Around the Wind by Skylia. Chapter 63, Bruce Banner, Part 2. Bruce had mixed feelings about staying in Malibu. On the bright side, the amount of new technology Tony gathered on his way back was astonishing. Bruce was not an engineer. He was very far away from being an engineer, but it didn't make them any less fascinating. Honestly, he was sold the moment Tony said that his ship had artificial gravity and a hyperdrive. A few days were never going to be enough to just even look at everything in detail, let alone studying them thoroughly. Tony's crew was, interesting. He didn't really see much of all of them. It was mainly Drongo and Bee that he spent time with. Well, he spent time with Drongo. The girl was just there, silent and attentive. He knew others must have found her presence disconcerting, but Bruce was not bothered. He knew what it was like to be looked at and treated differently. If you didn't feel like a freak or a monster on your own, the behavior of others could very well make you feel like one. Drongo was intelligent. It was not the sort of academic knowledge that you got in schools. He learned by experience, by encountering many different things and asking questions. He had been traveling for decades and picked up many things on his journeys. He was also serene. Bruce couldn't find a better word for it. His very presence radiated calm. He was a fighter, though. It was obvious from his well-trained body and his many scars. Mens sana in corpore sano. He was the best example of that. Bruce had never seen a better example. Juyu, he only talked to very briefly. She was nothing like her sister. She was blunt, energetic, and strong-minded. She was also the youngest member of the crew, and it showed. Not that she was naive or anything. It was just the way she referred to Tony and how Tony treated her in return. Tony was, dare he say, almost parental. That was not the only thing he noticed about Tony. The most obvious was, of course, his appearance. Younger, more muscular, and his skin a lot paler than it used to be. He knew that two of those were because of the years spent in space. Tony mentioned that the artificial gravity on his ship was higher than the gravity of Earth. It was like a constant workout. Plus, he had to do quite a lot of fighting on his own without his suit. And, of course, it was hard to get tan when you spent barely a few days at a time in sunlight. Bruce was sure that he would get back to his more usual skin tone after a few more weeks in Malibu. Looking younger, though, there was no natural explanation for that. But Tony answered without hesitation when he was asked. The answer was Loki. That was, of course, the not-so-stellar side of staying in Malibu. First, it was just Loki he was concerned about, not worrying about his own safety. Obviously, he was just being unnerved in general. It was Loki. It was understandable. Then he started to wonder why exactly Hatchet was not allowed to be in the same room with Bruce unless someone else was there with him. Tony said it was because he was an irritating little shit, which, fine, but it was not like Bruce couldn't handle a little annoyance. Tony knew that very well. Drongo said that Hatchet was difficult, that it was in his nature to be vexatious. He also said that he did not have ill intentions, that he was just the type to poke at things until they reacted. Then Juyu casually mentioned that he was Loki's best friend, and that put things into a new perspective. Bruce could see the similarity in their sharp smiles and calculating gazes. He could see the way they shared glances, raised their eyebrows meaningfully, or smirked about one thing or another. Sometimes Bruce heard them talking in a strange foreign language. It did not take a genius to realize that the reason for it was that they didn't want Bruce to overhear what they were discussing. Hatchet referred to Loki, followed his lead. That much was obvious. Bruce was not wary per se, maybe sort of bizarrely curious about them. The two of them looked like a matched set. Tall, slender, one light, one dark, both dangerous. Bruce, of course, paid close attention to the way Loki interacted with others. It didn't take much to realize that Tony was right about the same part. He had a very different demeanor from the last time he was on Earth. Back then, it was obvious he was crazy. He couldn't admit it even if he tried. His eyes were clear now, his voice steady. He held himself confidently, and there was nothing forced about it. He seemed calm as well. And he smiled. That was maybe the weirdest part. No manic grins. Smiles. He smiled a little whenever Juyu threw obscenities at Hatchet. Smiled when Hatchet just laughed in reaction. He smiled when Bee sat down next to him and he shared long looks with her too. And of course he smiled whenever Tony smiled or when he launched into an excited explanation about some piece of technology. The first time it happened, Bruce sort of froze for a moment. He couldn't recall what Tony said, but he was grinning after the words left his mouth, and Loki looked at him and smiled back. It was a small and pleased curve of lips, his eyes soft and attentive. Then he noticed Bruce watching, and he shut down right away, his face smoothing out into something unreadable and his eyes hardening along with it. Either Loki was the finest actor ever, or Bruce had to realize that the dependency he guessed Tony suffered from was really at least more of a codependency. They obviously slept in the same bed, but they never wandered far from one another even during the day. They ate together and worked together. They discussed everything from Tony's work to whatever thing Loki learnt about Earth through Jarvis that day. Bruce even went as far to ask Drongo about it.
Of course they can be apart,
he said.
They just choose not to.
The two of them were so in sync and so used to each other's presence. It was obviously the result of many years spent together. Bruce still didn't know where to put that, watching Tony act like that around the god. To be honest, Bruce expected a more active attempt at persuasion from Tony and the crew, which he, of course, wouldn't have bought for a second. The fact that Juyu, Hatchet, and Loki kept their cautious distance rather than trying to appear lovely and overly kind felt a lot more like truth than any attempt at playing nice could have. It felt a lot less like he was just seeing an act instead of reality. He had to call Cap on the second day, and he did not feel good about lying by omission. He told him that Tony indeed had a crew with him and promised to share details later, but he did not mention Loki. He knew he would have to, sooner rather than later. He wanted to give Tony another day or two before he did that, even if his general opinion was not likely to change. The crew was fine, they were not the problem. But no matter what Tony felt or believed, Loki was going to be returned to Asgard. It was something Thor made very clear when he returned to Earth after Tony and Loki disappeared. If his brother was alive, Thor would take him back to Asgard so that his trial could be finished. Everyone agreed. Steve agreed readily, Fury reluctantly, but Thor demanded nothing less. It was a done deal. The only thing the Avengers and S.H.I.E.L.D. could do was trying to contain Loki until Thor came to pick him up. It had been decided a long time ago. Tony standing by his side changed certain things, of course, but not their agreement with Asgard. Bruce told him that. He had to. He felt like Tony had to know. Tony simply told him that they would deal with Thor and Asgard when the time came. Bruce really did not want to know what he meant by that.
So, S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers,
Tony said out of the blue, not even looking up from his work.
I'm surprised it took you 3 days to finally start asking questions,
Bruce said.
I didn't want to make you feel like you were only here as an information source.
Tony shrugged.
Consider it,
Bruce said.
Unnecessary,
he added.
I do think I know you better than that.
Tony smiled a bit.
Still?
He asked.
You're less of a brat, but yeah, you're still very much you in every way that counts.
Tony started laughing this time, and he put down his tools to look at Bruce.
So Jarvis, Pepper, and Rhodey told me a lot of interesting things, but I want to hear the story from someone who was actually there for the whole thing.
Tony said.
Pepper and Rhodey were involved when things really went to hell, but they were not there for the beginning or the very end.
I'm listening,
Tony prompted.
It was Steve who got fed up with Fury,
Bruce started.
It started with you, actually, your disappearance and how it was handled. Pepper contacted S.H.I.E.L.D. because they were the only ones she could think of that could help. She knew this was no job for the police. Rhodey was there from the get-go, too, not wanting to be left out. Only when Jarvis was able to recover the security footage from that night was when Fury contacted all of us. At first, we only saw the very start of it, you walking into the room and Loki appearing through the mirror, like in some messed-up fairy tale. Naturally, we thought that he took you for revenge, maybe, but once we had the full footage, it was clear that it was not the case at all. It made things a lot more complicated because an unknown enemy is always worse than the devil you know. There was nothing we could do, though. No matter how much we searched, it was clear that we could not figure out where exactly you've been taken. We couldn't just track you. There was no route to follow. It was not pleasant being so useless. I worked with S.H.I.E.L.D. closely, hoping to find something, anything, but there was nothing to do.
I know that,
Tony said.
I knew you wouldn't be able to. Don't worry about it.
Easy to say now. Back then, we saw how they dragged you away, how they dragged Loki away. We all had a good imagination about what might be happening to you if you were alive.
And then
Thor showed up out of the blue just like before, searching for Loki. He thought he escaped from his prison, but when we showed him the video,
Bruce had to clear his throat. I thought I saw Thor angry before. I was wrong. He was beyond angry. Not that I blame him. I mean, even after the Hulk got his hands on Loki, he probably had a lot of broken bones, but he didn't bleed. He was just a lot worse for wear, and that's quite something considering. This time, when those
Bounty hunters.
Tony said,
Just tough guys sent after us.
yeah, so you know what happened. You were there. After Thor saw that, he was a lot more about rescuing his brother than tracking him down like he was a fugitive.
Let me guess. Fury did not like his change of tone.
Tony asked. Something like that.
Bruce shrugged.
Fury did not care about Loki. You were the only one he wanted to find. You know Thor. I mean, you don't know him that much, but you know that no matter what, he doesn't want Loki dead. Fury said Loki was not their problem anymore. It was not a big deal at the moment. Sure, Thor got angry with Fury, but those first few weeks were rough on everyone. It wasn't like Thor expected us to be worried about Loki, but Fury being all, he's getting what he deserves, and it's best if he's left there, did not go over well with Thor. Steve was trying to be the mediator, convinced that the two of you were probably in the same place. So even searching for only one of you would lead us to you both. Of course, we didn't find you. I was working a lot on this, trying to find a way to figure out where you were taken. But after a month or so, it became quite clear that there was nothing to do. I was also kind of itching to get out of S.H.I.E.L.D. Thor also planned to go back to Asgard because there was nothing else for him to do and he was restless. He had a lot of duties waiting for him back home too. Fury again disagreed. He said that with you being gone and Loki out there as a threat, the Avengers couldn't be disbanded. Thor is not the most patient guy on a good day, but Fury was really pushing his buttons with trying to tell him whether he could leave or not. Add the fact that he wanted to keep me there too. Well, Steve had enough. He told Thor to ignore Fury and just go. That he was not breaking his oath to protect Earth by it or anything. He also, helped me pack and all. He drove me to the airport himself. You probably don't know this about him, but he has this thing where his jaw goes all stubborn. He was looking like that the whole time.
Fury was probably pissed.
Tony said. He was. And from what I heard from Clint, Steve just stood there and stared him down. Unimpressed and not backing up for a second. So that was kind of strike one, so to speak.
Bruce said. Strike two.
That was the mess with Pepper in your suits, Bruce said. She probably told you all this. Fury wanted to have the suits and even Jarvis under S.H.I.E.L.D.'s control. Pepper told him hell no. Fury did not take no for an answer. By the time we were all informed about what was happening, things already got nasty. Pepper got her hands on some classified S.H.I.E.L.D. files and hired a bunch of guys who were listed as potential threats, mainly people who hated S.H.I.E.L.D. So when some S.H.I.E.L.D. agents wanted to march into the Stark Mansion in New York, where most of your tech was at the time, they were in for a surprise. Pepper security took them down and the media was like a corner away. Every news channel was all over that stuff. Government trying to steal from the mourning girlfriend of the late Tony Stark. The public went nuts standing up for her. Politicians were taking sides. It was crazy.
Yeah, she told me.
Tony smiled, looking immensely pleased. So Steve had that stubborn jaw thing going on again and took Pepper's side right away. He agreed that Fury had no right to take anything from her, going against her last will. From what I heard, it was the council that told Fury to back off in the end. Pepper still has the Stark security, and Fury thinks Pepper also has a lot of classified information about S.H.I.E.L.D. ready to use, just in case.
I can't confirm nor deny.
Tony smirked. Bruce huffed. So yeah, that was strike two. Pepper offered us the tower after Steve took her side, telling us about your plan to make the top levels the Avengers headquarters. It was a lot that you thought of the team like that. Steve got so weirdly silent for a few days. Not that I was not, touched. My floor looks really great. I couldn't thank you for it yet.
Don't mention it.
Tony shrugged. Bruce nodded before he continued. Thor drank a lot to your honor the next time he came to Earth and saw the floor you have prepared for him. He declared you one of the finest S.H.I.E.L.D. brothers he had the honor to fight alongside with.
Nice of him.
Tony said. He was glad he did not have to deal with Fury anymore, but he sometimes also got that faraway look in his eyes when Rudy talked about you. Bruce added. I think you reminded him
Of Loki?
Tony asked.
No kidding, we're very similar.
It was hard to imagine that for a long while, Bruce said. Thor never talks about Loki, so it's not like we heard that much about him. I can sort of see it now.
Tony just smiled again. So what was strike three?
He asked. The Winter Soldier. Bruce said. As in Bucky Barnes. What did Pepper tell you?
About this? Not much. She said Steve cut all ties with S.H.I.E.L.D. because of it.
Well, we already had some new guys, Bruce started. Not from S.H.I.E.L.D. It's just how the years passed, there was trouble, and we meet people. Mostly we got involved in things S.H.I.E.L.D. did, worked closely with them, but then sometimes we stumbled on other things, and, well, the team expanded.
That I already heard about, Tony said.
Well, it's like this. There was the core group, Steve, Thor, Clint, Natasha, and me. But as we encountered things, we made some allies. Those who did not become Avengers, but were still associated with us, became the second-tier members. That started with Rhodey, who was willing to help out if there was trouble, but he did not want to officially be an Avenger. Then there was Sam Wilson, S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, good guy. He helps out a lot, but not strictly an Avenger either. As time went on, more and more people became second-tier members, and we had people to call when there was something happening. People outside of S.H.I.E.L.D. But then S.H.I.E.L.D. dragged us into this manhunt. They wanted to capture this deadly spy and assassin called the Winter Soldier. Steve agreed because he had no reason not to, but then, well, it turned out it was Bucky, who's
Cap's best friend, supposedly died in World War II.
Yeah, the problem was that he did not remember that. The Soviets messed up his brain pretty badly. They're the ones who found him when he went missing in action. They kept him in cryostasis for most of the time, Bruce said. When we realized who he really was, Fury and Steve got into an immense fight. Fury believed there was no hope to fix him and that he was too dangerous to not deal with him. Steve, of course, was not so willing to let his long-lost friend be killed. When Fury did not budge, Steve turned his back on him, said that S.H.I.E.L.D. can stay out of it then. That the Avengers were not under Fury's lead, and that he could not dictate what they could or couldn't do. He called in all the non-S.H.I.E.L.D. second-tier members and set out to get Bucky back.
Fury
did not back off and still sent his agents out to eliminate the Winter Soldier, Bruce said. Yeah, it was time to pick sides.
You picked the Avengers,
Tony said. Obviously, Bruce answered. So did Thor, unsurprisingly. Natasha and Clint remained with S.H.I.E.L.D. And while Steve did not kick them out, he did declare them second-tier members and pulled in others for the core group. Most of them were not associated with S.H.I.E.L.D. anyway, so it was no hardship for them to declare loyalty to Steve and the Avengers.
And Cap was right about Bucky.
Oh, it was, Bruce said. Steve did it. I don't even know how. I was more needed than the Hulk, so I was not on the field. But he somehow did it. Bucky's fine. I mean, he has a lot to deal with, but things he did. But he remembers who he really is, and he's recovering. He's second tier, officially, but he basically lives in the tower, so he might as well count as a full-time member.
Huh,
Tony said. You already knew most of this, Bruce said.
Yes, but I wanted to hear your version. Pepper was a little biased. So what about Barton and Romanoff?
Glenn's fine. He doesn't cross certain lines. He does his work for S.H.I.E.L.D. He does his work for the Avengers. He doesn't share information with either side. He's Switzerland. He tries very hard not to get dragged into things even further, even if he agrees that Fury made some really bad calls. Natasha is more firmly on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s side. She and Steve argue a lot, but she's also our main connection with S.H.I.E.L.D., and no matter what, sometimes we still need to work with them. Natasha shares information both with Steve and Fury, and I don't think Steve trusts her, so he always goes to Clint for information. It's not ideal. Tony leaned back in his chair, looking thoughtful. If you're trying to decide which side is better for you,
Don't be ridiculous, Tony said. I don't give a rat's ass about S.H.I.E.L.D. I have my own side, but that doesn't mean it cannot also be the Avengers side.
But,
Bruce prompted. But my side includes Loki. That's a fact. So this is not really up to me, to be honest. I'm willing to stand on the same side 100%.
We just need to be okay with Loki.
Maybe that's too much to ask for. I'm willing to settle for non-hostile tolerance.
Bruce sighed. This was a mess. You know I have to tell Steve and the others about him, Bruce said. But if you don't want me to inform S.H.I.E.L.D.,
I'll leave that in your hands,
Tony said.
I knew you were not with S.H.I.E.L.D., so the past days was me sharing information with the Avengers.
Seriously, this is giving me a headache, Bruce complained. I'm going to have to let Steve decide, he said then.
Suit yourself.
Tony shrugged. You seem awfully calm about this.
We both know that you can't just attack Loki and keep him locked up. Tony said calmly, and not just because I won't let you. And I already told you that there are bigger threats than Loki out there gunning for Earth. Loki is not hostile anymore. He doesn't want Earth, and he doesn't want any other realm or planet either. I have already explained to you how he got involved in the invasion and what was done to him after he was abducted from Asgard. You also know that Thor and Asgard want Loki alive, and not even Fury can afford to piss them off by trying to kill their wayward prince. If you think about this thoroughly,
There's nothing we can do unless Loki attacks us, Bruce said. Is that what you're saying?
Tony shrugged.
Bruce just looked at it for a moment. This is a mess, Bruce sighed.
It doesn't have to be,
Tony said. That's a pipe dream and you know it,
Bruce told him.
Tony didn't argue.
On the fourth morning, Steve informed him that Fury was getting impatient about waiting for Bruce, and also that Bruce should take his time, Fury be damned. Bruce heard Mikey laugh in the background, calling Steve a big bad rebel. Bruce went to have breakfast after the call, only finding Tony in the kitchen. Drongo and Bee always ate earlier, while Juyu and Hatchet always slept for a while longer. The lack of Loki was unusual, though.
I can't believe you're drinking tea,
Bruce observed. I was perfectly fine with that coffee for years. I'm not going to pick up bad habits again. Tony said, I plan to live a very long, healthy life.
It's so surreal to hear things like that coming out of your mouth,
Bruce said. It made Tony chuckle. Loki walked in just as Bruce sat down with his toast. It was expected, really. Wherever one of them was, the other was bound to show up very soon. He was not the jeans teacher guy, but he was dressed very casually. Bruce still did not get used to seeing him without armor. He looked a lot smaller. Tony swallowed his food as he frowned at Loki. What? Loki asked. It's day 7, Loki, Tony said. Loki frowned deeply, then glanced at Bruce for a moment. Banner's here, he said. He's no stranger, Tony answered. For you, maybe, Loki argued. Look, you know I'm not going to push this, Tony said. Loki clenched his jaw and started glaring at the random spot on the counter. Tony stood up to walk to him, his attention focused on the other completely. He grabbed hold of both of Loki's hands and closed them with his own, raising them up and pulling them close to his chest. You want to hole up with Hatchet? He asked. No, I'm not going to hide like some... He huffed out a frustrated breath, and Bruce really wanted to know what was going on now. Tony looked at the god steadily, keeping hold of his hands, and Loki sighed after a moment, some of the tension seeping out of his shoulders. Then he closed his eyes. It took a moment for Bruce to notice the way his fingers turned blue. The next moment, it was impossible to miss the change because the color spread up on his neck until his whole head was the same deep, vibrant color. Bruce was sure his eyes widened a little because that did not look like Loki shape-shifting for kicks. Tony smiled and pulled up Loki's still-trapped hands to put small kisses on them. When Loki opened his eyes, they were completely red. There you go. Tony spoke quietly, smiling up at the god. His voice was muffled from the way his mouth was pressed to Loki's knuckles. Want to try what peanut butter tastes like? He asked then cheerfully. Juyu loves the stuff. Loki just huffed as he stepped away from the man who was sitting down by the table. Tony moved to gather his plate and mug, putting them in the sink before he grabbed a few things from the cupboard.
Not to be rude or anything,
Bruce spoke up.
but, can I ask what...
It's my natural form, Dr. Banner, Loki said firmly. When I look not unlike a Midgardian, it is a disguise.
Oh, I see,
He said, genuinely surprised. Tony turned back around from the counter where he was, making a peanut butter sandwich. They raise people in Asgard to hate Jotnar. Tony explained his voice was a lot less pleasant immediately. Loki's getting used to his natural Jotun shape, to get a bit more comfortable with it. We agreed that he should spend some time like this at least once a week. That was... Bruce didn't know where to put that right away.
So you're a completely different race than Thor,
Bruce said. He knew Loki was not Thor's blood brother, but he assumed they were at least the same race. Loki scoffed. Oh, has Thor not told you the tale of the Great War between Asgard and Jotunheim? He asked. It is where my story starts. But I suppose none of you were all too interested in that. Bruce glanced up at Tony, but he already had his back to them smearing peanut butter on some bread.
Well, I've got nothing better to do right now,
Bruce said. More information was always an advantage. It couldn't hurt to know more about what went down in Asgard before Loki showed up leading an alien invasion. Tony put down a plate in front of Loki and sat back down to the table. The look on his face told Bruce that he was about to hear quite a tale.